Imagine falling asleep beneath the marble arches of Rome, where whispers of betrayal drift like smoke, and where the softest words could mean your life. From the lowest farmhand to the silver-tongued senators of the Curia, each Roman was bound by an invisible thread to the empire's ideals. That thread, they believed, must never break. And so, when treason was suspected, it was not simply punished, it was exercised. Tonight, we begin. In the hush of ancient Rome, when the sun had long since set and the oil lamps flickered behind clay windows, a silence hung over the city that was not just from sleep. It was the silence of fear, of secrets held close, and of loyalties tested in the shadows. Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet drift through the darker corridors of Roman justice, a place where treason was not merely a crime, but an act so feared, so reviled, it became a ghost that haunted generations. Rome, the eternal city, was built on loyalty to the state. The Roman word for treason was perduellio, a term that once referred specifically to acts of warfare against the state, but over time became a net cast wide enough to ensnare nearly anyone. One might ignore satire, the next would consider it a dagger to the throat of imperial honor. That made life delicate, even dangerous. A neighbor might become a witness, a friend, an informant, a servant, a spy. It included plotting against the emperor, yes, but also whispering dissent, joking about Caesar's divine nature, or owning scrolls with forbidden words. Roman law said that a slave's testimony could only be trusted if given under torture. This belief, strange to us now, was rooted in a deep suspicion of human nature. The idea was that only pain could peel away lies, and so even the innocent screamed, and this definition changed, twisted, and expanded as emperors came and went. Each new ruler carried his own sensitivities. Slaves, in particular, occupied a strange position. In one cold chamber beneath the forum, it is said there, stood a stone slab worn smooth by knees not from worship, but from pleading. Here, those accused of treason were brought to kneel before men who held their fate like a coin waiting to be tossed. Heads you live, tails you disappear. The punishment depended on your place in Roman society. For the highborn there was at least the illusion of dignity. They might be allowed to open their own veins in a ritual suicide, bathing themselves in warm water to bleed quietly into the next world. This was seen as an act of nobility, a final, graceful bow. The cross stood not just as a method of death, but as a message. Slowly dying in view of the public was a billboard of state power, an eternal warning carved into flesh. But for most, the state had other plans. Exile was common. The guilty would be stripped of their citizenship and forced into the lonely margins of the empire. No fire. Rome, in its relentless brilliance, invented a punishment beyond death. Damnat, a traitor's name would be chipped away from stone, scraped from scrolls, and burned from memory. Statues destroyed, portraits erased, their existence revoked. No water, no shelter from those who once called you friend. The concept of mistis meant that treason corrupted the bloodline. Children lost their inheritance. Wives were left in disgrace. A name once spoken with pride would suddenly fall silent. A punishment called aqua et igni interdictio made it illegal to offer help to a condemned person. They became living ghosts. And for the lowest of the low, for those whose crimes were deemed not just offensive but poisonous, there was crucifixion. Sometimes, execution was not the end. It was as if the traitor had never been born. Whole families could be punished for a single disloyal ancestor.
The most chilling aspect, though, was how ordinary this all became. Under emperors like Tiberius and Domitian, accusations of treason flowed like wine at a feast. People learned to listen carefully, to speak rarely. Markets bustled. Gladiators fought. He simply vanishes from his home, his sandals left at the door. Philosophers taught in courtyards. Life, in all its complexity, continued, but no one believes it. The truth is simpler. Lucius crossed the line. He could not see. Only a single candle and a soft scrape of footstep. He is questioned not with words, but with silence, until he speaks to fill it. He says he meant no harm. He begs for mercy. The candle flickers, but beneath the surface, there was a current of quiet fear. A sense that the walls themselves were listening. To smile and bow and nod. Never too little, never too much. One night, over watered wine, he makes a careless joker jab at the emperor's latest monument. He laughs. A few friends smile. One does not. And through it all, the city moved forward. Imagine now a young man named Lucius, an educated scribe in service to a minor senator. 2 days later, Lucius is taken. No charges read aloud. No opportunity to argue. He wakes in a dark room. There are no windows. The empire endured in part because fear kept its heart beating. And though we now study its greatness, its roads, its laws, its beauty, we must also remember what that greatness cost. Some weeks later in the market, someone mentions that Lucius has moved to the coast, that he took up fishing. The people of Rome learned these lessons well.
In the quiet corners of the empire, the reach of Roman law stretched farther than any legion ever could. Beyond the aqueducts and the colosseums, beyond the bustling forums and marble columns, there were voices that spoke in hushed tones, voices that remembered, that whispered, that feared. Tonight, dear listener, we continue our journey through that darker undercurrent of Rome's greatness, through the labyrinth of its laws, its punishments, and the unseen mechanisms that held it all together. Let us return to a time when to be Roman was to walk a thin line between honor and peril, when even silence, if held too long, might draw suspicion. There was once a senator named Aulus Septimus, a man of proud lineage, who served under the rule of Emperor Domitian. Aulus was a careful man, measured in speech, slow to anger, generous in public, and cautious in private. He knew the ways of the court. He knew that the emperor's gaze was both sharp and shifting. He had spent years cultivating neutrality, neither sycophant nor rebel, but neutrality, in the late empire, was its own kind of danger. One autumn morning, as the leaves browned along the Tiber, a small slip of parchment was found near the temple of Vesta. Its ink had run slightly in the damp. Its words were few, a poem mocking the emperor's latest monument. The signature, a Septimus. No one believed he wrote it, but the seal was real. The accusation was enough. Within hours, he stood trial, not before a jury of peers, but in a private chamber lined with bronze masks. These masks, mounted on the wall, were once death masks of noble ancestors. Now, they watched silently as their descendant pleaded his innocence. He was given the chance to fall on his sword, a final favor, a final mercy. He declined, choosing, instead, to be exiled to a remote island in the Tyrrhenian Sea. There, among the wind-blown pines and salt-blasted cliffs, he would live out the rest of his days in quiet reflection, denied letters, denied books, denied even the sky on some days, when storms blanketed the coast. And yet, his name would not be erased, for Domitian wanted him remembered as a warning. There were subtler tools of punishment, too. Some accused were placed under cura publica, public guardianship, a kind of house arrest where the mind was caged more than the body. Every visitor had to be approved, every scroll censored, meals were delivered, conversations monitored, a life that was neither death nor freedom. It is said that one such man, a philosopher named Lucullus, lost the ability to speak altogether, not through physical damage, but through silence, a silence that grew so large within him, it eclipsed the voice he once used to teach. Rome did not always need blood to exact revenge. Even architecture played its part. Prisons, such as the Tullianum, buried beneath layers of city stone, were not large, they were not bright, they were not even built to house people long-term. These were holding places, damp and airless, where light dared not enter, where the very stones seemed to whisper accusations. Imagine, dear listener, the weight of those walls, cold, slick with time, pressing close against your thoughts. You are not dead. but you are no longer among the living. This was a kind of death Rome perfected. The erasure of hope. Sometimes, the state made sport of memory. Traitors were reenacted in plays, mocked on stage. Their last words were performed by actors for laughing crowds, their faces worn by masks that twisted their features into absurdity. Rome made their shame immortal. And always, the message remained the same. The empire is eternal. You are not. So as you settle deeper into rest, imagine that world once more. Imagine the shadows cast by torchlight along marble corridors. Imagine the hush of senators who no longer spoke freely. Imagine a people who had learned that the greatest danger came not from outside Rome, but from within. Rest now, dear listener. The stones remember, and they will speak again soon. Asterisk, beneath the quiet discipline of Rome's order, there lay an artistry to control. It was not always forged in iron or shouted from marble steps. Sometimes, it hummed beneath the city, carried in the footsteps of informers, in the ink of scribes, in the glint of a senator's eyes that dared not blink too long. Tonight, dear listener, we journey further into the spaces where treason was not only punished but preemptively hunted. Let your body grow heavy, and your thoughts quiet as we revisit a Rome of shadows. There was once a whisper on the Palatine Hill, a name spoken not aloud, but traced in steam across bathing pools and scribbled in the margins of ledgers. That name belonged to Gaius Verinius, a financial administrator trusted with imperial treasuries. His offense, balancing books too well, he had, without fanfare, uncovered discrepancies. Not with drama, not with rebellion, just numbers. Too many denarii disappearing into the estates of generals. Land purchases with no owner. Ships funded with no route. Gaius said nothing. But silence, in Rome, was its own kind of cry. A letter arrived at his villa, sealed in black wax. No words, just a coin, a simple sestertius, filed down to one side, jagged, a sign. By dusk, his household was gone, his slaves vanished or imprisoned, his wife escorted to her father's estate. Gaius, he entered the tomb, not as a traitor, not even as accused, but as a suspect by virtue of silence. No records were kept of his time there, but years later, a broken chain was found beneath the prison floor, and scratched into the stone beside it, 6 words, I knew, and I kept quiet. Rome punished secrets, whether shouted or swallowed. Consider also the fate of Julia Minor, niece to Augustus himself. Her crime, she loved to freely. Letters recovered from her chamber revealed poetic exchanges with a philosopher, lines that praised liberty over empire, the heart over duty. It was not the affair that drew Rome's ire. It was the idea. Love, in the language of dissent, became treason. She was banished not to a villa, but to the desolate island of Pandateria, its cliffs sheer, its winds relentless, her every step watched by soldiers, her meals tasted before reaching her lips. She was allowed no ink, no parchment, no mirrors. To be denied reflection was the ultimate erasure of self, and so, the empire maintained itself not only through spectacle, but through absence, lives unspoken, names unwritten, pain that left no visible scar. In the courts, the principle of majestas, the dignity of the emperor, became a net so wide that entire philosophies were criminalized. A stoic statement, a jest in the wrong tone, a pupil quoting the wrong passage, all became acts of rebellion. Treason, in its broadest Roman definition, was no longer about action, it was about air, the way you breathed it, the direction of your gaze. So, let us pause. Let us imagine Rome not only as marble and empire, but as breath and watchfulness. A city of statues that watched back, a civilization that understood how deeply fear can root itself when grown in silence. As your thoughts drift like incense through old basilicas, think of the footsteps muffled in Senate halls, the coded glances between scribes, the coins passed in silence that said more than words ever could. Rest now, dear listener. Let the hush of ancient judgment lull you to stillness. When morning light touched the eastern walls of the forum, it did not chase away the shadows. It simply made them softer. Rome, even at its brightest, held darkness like breath in the chest, and in the quiet hush of the city's waking hours, another story of treason would quietly unfurl, unseen by crowds, unheard by time. You are drifting deeper now, dear listener. Let your breath slow, let your muscles release. Let the stonework of ancient corridors guide your mind to stillness. There once lived a humble architect named Publius Lautius, known for designing aqueducts that curved with the grace of the hills they crossed. He had never served in politics. He had never written a scroll of dissent. And yet, one day, his name appeared on a list of suspects, quiet citizens, those who, through association alone, became questionable. Publius had shared a villa wall with a man once exiled. That was all. The charge, infamia, per contactum dishonor, through contact, a legal fiction, yet real enough to ruin. He was summoned, not to answer, but to explain why he should not disappear. They asked him, softly, why he had never spoken against his neighbor, why he had never denounced him. His answer, that he had nothing to report, was heard as refusal. He was not tortured. He was not executed. He was simply reassigned, sent to a distant province under the guise of architectural need. There, he worked, with stone and sand and silence. No letters home, no mention in scrolls. His aqueducts carried water, but his name carried nothing. It vanished. This was another form of punishment Rome excelled in. Erasure by exile within the empire. The body remained alive, but the legacy dashed gone further into the empire's history. During the Severan dynasty, a curious law was passed. It required citizens, once a year, to publicly reaffirm loyalty to the emperor through ritual. The ritual was simple. A pinch of incense burned before an imperial bust, but for followers of forbidden cults. For early Christians and secret worshippers of gods long outlawed, even this pinch was betrayal of faith, and refusal, betrayal of Rome. Many chose the flames. One such man was Calventius, a veteran soldier who had served under Marcus Aurelius. Quiet, upright, respected, but he refused to light the incense. He asked instead to die at dawn, standing, facing east, with a stone in his hand from the Tiber River. That stone was later found in a soldier's pouch, a keepsake, a symbol. Rome remembered Calventius, not as a traitor, but as a pair to the end, yet punished for the shape of his loyalty. This, too, was treason's mirror, reflecting the complexity of belief, the edge where conscience met law. So breathe now, slowly, let the figures fade in and out of the mists. Publius with his forgotten bridges, Calventius with his stone, each punished not for action, but for alignment, for refusal to bend when Rome demanded it. As your body sinks, let these thoughts drift, like sand, through a time-worn amphora. Let the stillness of ancient judgments settle gently over your mind. Tomorrow, we will wander further. For now, sleep deeply, under the watch of old gods and colder emperors. There is a peculiar silence in the libraries of the dead, where names erased from marble linger faintly in forgotten ledgers, and footsteps echo down corridors of memory. This, dear listener, is where we drift next, deeper still into the heart of Rome's shadowed justice. You are floating now, eyes heavy, the hush of history tucking itself around your thoughts. Let your breath match the cadence of an old scroll unrolling slowly. There was a woman once, her name long lost, but her title preserved in a single line scratched behind a crumbling fresco. Domina Perdita, the Lost Lady. She had been married to a governor of Dacia, a man beloved by his region and respected in the Senate. But he had written a letter. Just one dot. It spoke of grain shortages, of the people's unrest, and of the emperor's distant silence. It was meant for another senator, but the courier faltered. The letter was opened. The content, deemed seditious. The governor was executed quietly, without trial. But Domina Perdita was not accused. Not formally. Instead, she was made into an object of theater. not in chains or cages, but in rumor and exclusion. No one visited. Her name was no longer spoken at banquets. The temples refused her offerings. Even the family crest above her door was painted over by a stranger's hand. She walked the streets unchallenged but unseen, a living ghost. This was another Roman punishment. Crueler than pain, social nullification. When Rome chose not to kill you, but made sure the world acted as though you were already dead. In the western provinces, similar fates befell scholars and teachers. Under Caraquella, loyalty to the emperor became part of the school curriculum. And those who deviated, who taught virtue outside of imperial context, were arrested under the law of moral distortion. A tutor named Priscus, beloved in Hispania, was accused not for what he taught, but for what he omitted. He never mentioned the emperor, not once. His students were questioned, his scrolls seized, his home sealed with wax bearing the state's eagle dot. No record exists of his death. But centuries later, a stone tablet was found near modern-day. On it, etched in a shaking hand, "Truth needs no title." That was Rome. Punishment not always through whip or sword, but through the air you breathed, the words you were expected to say. In the courts, during the later empire, there emerged a category of crime called silentium, infidelis faithless silence. It targeted those who failed to denounce, failed to praise, failed to perform the daily rituals of loyalty. There is one case, preserved in the writings of Cassius Dio, about a widow named Vibia. Her husband, an army officer, had died under mysterious orders. She did not weep publicly. She did not wear the mourning veil. She did not light the proper lamps. And for her composure, she was brought before the tribunal. They asked if she believed in Rome. She said, calmly, "I believe in justice." The court fell silent. The scrolls say she was sentenced not to death but to perpetual witnessing. A sentence where she was made to attend every execution in her province. Made to witness betrayal, punished. Made to stand in silence while others fell. Her presence became a legend. A woman in black. Always. Watching. Never speaking. And so tonight, as your eyes begin to close, imagine the slow shuffle of her sandals across ancient stone. The creak of wooden beams prepared for judgment. The silence that settled just before a name was struck from the record. These were not moments of loud fury. These were the soft, unrelenting whispers of control. Rome was eternal. Yes, but its eternity was built on a million quiet erasures. Rest now, dear listener. The candles are low. The verdicts sleep beneath dust. And tomorrow, the scroll continues. In the hush of night, when even the stars over Rome flicker more faintly, we open the next parchment of forgotten cruelty. Let your mind slow as the wax seal breaks. The scroll unfurls, and another shadowed name is whispered into the stillness. Tonight we remember the specter of a nobleman of the equestrian class. Ignatius Calvus was once favored by the emperor himself, a man of letters and laws, who advised on tax reform and property disputes. But in the quiet archives of his domus, beneath layers of legal ink, a hidden commentary was found critical, pointed, and unsigned. No one knew he had written it, until a storm dislodged a tile from the roof of his study. Water seeped in, scrolls soaked, servants cleaned, and a slave discovered the parchment behind a false panel. The slave, following Roman custom, brought it first to the master of the house himself. And in that moment, Ignatius had a choice. He burned the paper, but the act had been witnessed. 3 days later, the slave vanished. 2 more days passed. Then Ignatius was summoned, but not to a courtroom. He was taken to the temple of Concord, the very symbol of Roman harmony. There, beneath statues of smiling gods, he was asked a single question. Did you once write about the flaws of empire? He answered, I wrote about the nature of power. The high magistrate nodded. No trial was held. Instead, Ignatius was sentenced to the punishment known only by its ceremonial title vox, exilister, exiled voice. He was transported to a remote tower near the cliffs of Illyria. There, he was kept alive but forbidden to speak. His tongue was not removed. His mouth was not bound. But any word spoken would be met with the whip. His guards rotated weekly. None spoke his name. His meals were placed on a stone tray. No greetings. No questions. And so he remained silent among the sea winds. What made this punishment particularly Roman was its design. It was not about pain. It was about transformation. To make a man of law into a memory of silence. Years later, fishermen claimed they saw a figure in white standing on the tower's edge, mouthing words to the waves. Whether it was Ignatius or his ghost, none could say. Such cruelty, veiled in dignity, became a hallmark of the late empire. In cities like Antioch and Alexandria, local governors were given broader discretion to investigate treasonous attitudes, not deeds, not actions, but attitudes. This era birthed the profession of the intuitionarius, a specialist trained to detect loyalty, not by confession, but by expression, a crease in the brow during the emperor's procession, an exhale after the imperial hymn. One such case tells of a merchant named Secundus who had thrived selling silks to aristocrats. He had paid his taxes, attended civic rituals, but a neighbor accused him of walking without pride during Triumph Week. Secundus was taken to a garden tribunal, where magistrates surrounded him in a circle and observed him for 3 hours. He did not falter, but as he stood to leave, a bee landed on his hand. He flinched and laughed. They claimed his laughter mocked the ceremony. His punishment was immediate. Memoria discreta dissected memory. All contracts bearing his name were voided. His signature erased from business ledgers. His house, once painted in deep Pompeian reds, was repainted gray by decree. No mention of him was to be made in public records. And so, though he walked free, no one could acknowledge his presence. One child, years later, whispered to her brother, "That is the man with no past." Secundus lived another 2 decades. But history did not. And further west, in the fading frontiers of Gaul, a governor named Flaccus Decianus created a local variation of treason punishment called oblivium, circular. It required the accused to walk in a circle around the village square from sunrise to sunset, blindfolded, in silence, for 7 days. Villagers were required by law to watch. They could not intervene. They could not feed him. They could not avert their eyes. Flaccus believed that guilt could be felt most deeply through witnessing one's disconnection from self, from time, from direction. The last man sentenced under this law, a former herald named Moreau, was blind when the 7 days ended, not from the cloth that covered his eyes, but from the weight of hours, passed in unbroken stillness. He spoke only once after, "The sun moves, but I do not." Let those words linger now in your mind. Soft as dusk. Rome's cruelty was not chaos. It was ritualized, polished, thoughtful, a machinery of silence, a theater where the actors were real, but the applause never came. Rest now. The tower fades. The tribunal garden is empty. The man with no name passes gently into fog. Beneath the Senate stones, and beyond the pillars of triumphal arches, there lived a word the Romans rarely spoke aloud: interregnum. The space between emperors, between commands, between the fragile illusion of eternal control. It was in these moments, these slivers of suspended breath, that treason whispered most loudly, and Rome punished it not with fire but with forgetting. As you drift tonight, let us wander gently into the most shadowed corridors of punishment, quiet as cruelties, crafted 4 times when no leader reigned, but silence ruled with iron hands. We begin in the year 192 CE. After the assassination of Emperor Commodus, for weeks, Rome was unsure. Voice declared sovereignty, and in the absence of an emperor, all loyalties became suspect. It was during this uneasy calm that a senator named Domitius Lentulus stood up in the Curia and suggested publicly that Rome should restore the old republic. He did not shout. He did not incite. He simply said the word Republica. Within hours, he was seized, not by guards, but by his peers. He was led not to the prisons, but to a dining hall beneath the temple of Castor. There, a sentence was delivered. that bore no official seal. The punishment was called usura soleus, the interest of the sun. Domitius was forced to stand on a marble pedestal from sunrise to sunset each day for an entire lunar month. He was allowed no speech, no shade, no audience. Each hour, a new senator would approach and whisper an imperial title into his ear: Augustus, Caesar, Pontifex, Maximus. These words were meant to restore his mind to order. He survived the month, but he never again stood in public. He was seen, years later, planting olive trees in silence on his estate in Apulia. The trees, they say, grew in a perfect circle, if echoing something. Further east, in Cappadocia, an obscure punishment arose for those suspected of disloyal correspondence. Carriers of unverified letters, scribes, slaves, or messengers were subjected to manus obscura, or the darkened hand. The ritual was complex. First, the condemned would be handed a scroll soaked in ink and ash. Then, for 1 hour, they were forced to press their palms into wax tablets repeatedly, the stains rendering their hands black. Once stained, they were forbidden to touch another human being for the rest of their lives. The mark of betrayal wasn't on parchment, but etched into flesh. A boy named Gaius Felix, barely 16, once carried a scroll across the Tarsus range. Unaware it held subversive words, he returned with pride. He was greeted with silence. His mother wept and gave him gloves of lambskin. He wore them every day. He carved wood in solitude. At his death, his hands were still black, his gloves worn thin. A quiet monument stands near his village now. A pair of hands, clasped but never touching. And now, we drift toward the provinces of Germania Inferior, where Rome faced frequent rebellion. Here, the legions imposed a discipline that mirrored justice, but often became its cruel reflection. In one such outpost, a standard-bearer named Vitruvius Minor was found reading aloud from the writings of Cicero, praising the virtues of shared power. His centurion asked only one question: "Do you believe Rome is a republic still?" Vitruvius answered, "Rome is whatever we choose to remember." His punishment, Itiafractus, the broken march. He was ordered to walk across the province alone, wearing half armor, carrying a banner with no emblem. Each village he entered was warned to greet him with silence. Each road he walked bore no company. When he reached the sea, he was told to stand until sundown. He did. Then he vanished. A legend says sailors once saw a man standing waist-deep in the Rhine, staring west, unblinking. No one dared to speak to him. Rome used stories as shackles. Dear dreamer, they punished not just flesh, but legacy. One final whisper for tonight. In the late empire, a new tribunal, Arosta Echo Tribunal. They did not punish acts, they punished similarities. If your name sounded like a known traitor, if your face resembled one erased from mosaics, if your voice echoed a condemned philosopher, you could be summoned. They asked no questions. You were simply given a mask, a white, featureless faceplate, and told to wear it every time you left your home. Some complied, some fled, some broke, but others gathered, quietly, in baths, in alleys, in shadowed corners of basilicas. They looked at one another, and found in their sameness a strength. These were the whisperers of Vesta, a faceless order who sang lullabies on the wind and carved poems beneath aqueducts. Their crime, familiarity, their punishment. To lose the face, Rome feared as you drift. Now, remember, treason in Rome was not always fire and chain. It was memory and rhythm, ink and pause, stain and silence. Rest, gently, beneath the cracked ceiling of history. Part 9 awaits, deeper still. Let us now enter the subterranean heart of Rome, where secrets were stored like grain, stacked, measured, and locked away behind marble silence. Beneath the temple of Saturn, where the treasury lay, the most dangerous form of treason took root, the theft of information. In the early 3rd century, a young archivist named Publius Maro was caught copying scrolls by candlelight. These scrolls held census data, innocuous numbers to most, but powerful in the wrong hands. One could with the right patterns, learn who owed whom, where land was most fertile, and who had quietly fallen out of favor. Moro's punishment was neither execution nor exile. He was subjected to liberum, sepultura, the burial of books, in a small room with no windows. Beneath the Senate floor, Moro was entombed with the scrolls he had copied, not as a guardian, but as a prisoner. His task, to recopy the texts endlessly, without change or error. When his eyes dimmed, others were brought in to read aloud, and he would continue writing by sound alone. It is said that he spent 15 years in that chamber. When released, he spoke only in phrases found in tax ledgers and civic rolls, his own name forgotten, his life reduced to footnotes. Meanwhile, above him, the city moved on. In Ostia, Rome's vital port, a different punishment evolved for traitors who engaged in economic sabotage, those who hoarded grain or salted meat to cause scarcity during wartime. The term used was crime infames, the crime of hunger. One such traitor, Attilius Clemens, had purchased nearly all grain shipments for a month and stored them in a warehouse under false names. He planned to sell them at triple the price. He was discovered, but Rome did not jail him. Instead, they condemned him to Cena Perpetuus, the perpetual meal, for 90 days. Attilius was forced to sit at a banquet table each evening, surrounded by guards and mocked slaves, while food was placed before him but never served. He could see it, smell it, watch it rot, but never taste it. Was a punishment of excess turned to agony. By the end, Attilius refused food even when offered. He whispered, "No flavor remains." Further inland, in the hills of Umbria, the cultus presenti, rural sect accused of inciting unrest through whispered prophecy, was disbanded through a tactic Rome rarely admitted to: linguistic erasure. The priests and priestesses were forbidden to speak their tongue. Latin was enforced not just in courts and commerce, but in dreams. Each night, children were tested in Latin. Those who faltered were sent to somnum iudici, the sleep of judgment. They were not hurt, but each morning, their beds were cold. A message would be etched on their doors: lingua tradita, the tongue has betrayed. Entire dialects disappeared this way. Whole cultures unspoken into extinction. Treason in Rome, dear dreamer, did not always bleed. Sometimes, it simply faded. Now let us turn to a punishment rooted in sight: the oculus veritas, or eye of truth, used primarily in legal cases. It was a tribunal held entirely in darkness. The accused would sit in a room lit only by a single oil lamp behind a lattice. Questions were whispered, answers spoken aloud, but no one could see each other. Then, a curious test was administered. The accused was handed a bowl of stones and told to select one based on a question posed about truth, about allegiance, about memory. Each stone bore a more vinegar, rose, oil, ash. The pattern of chosen stones was recorded. In one notorious case, a poet named Calvus Severianus chose stones scented with honey and cedar when asked about the emperor's virtue. The tribunal read this as sarcasm. He was sentenced to ponifloria, the punishment of flowers. Each morning, for a full year, petals were poured into his home through a vent. Sounds beautiful, until the petals rotted, until insects came, until nothing could be cleaned. The stench became unbearable. Guests refused to enter. His name fell from memory. He lived, forgotten, inside a perfumed tomb. And now, as the oil in our imagined lamp dims, think of a final punishment used, not for traitors of action, but traitors of vision. Those who saw things the state forbade. These were the visors, artists, mapmakers, even astrologers. Rome did not always kill them. Instead, they were sentenced to linea falsa, the false line. They were given ink and told to draw, but never in straight lines, never in circles, only in patterns that looped, twisted, and led nowhere. Walls of their homes were painted with their work-endless loops, and they were told each week to revise them. One such man, named Priscus, painted loops for 20 years. His home became a labyrinth of ink. When he died, no one could find the door. Sleep now, Within these spirals, let the false line guide you deeper, not into chaos, but into peace. For in the ruins of cruelty, we find the echoes of care, the gentle lull of warning. Let us return to the threshold of Rome's power, not in marble halls this time, but on the open roads that stretched like veins through the empire. Roads carried trade, soldiers, and whispers. And along these roads, betrayal was punished with motion, endless and cruel. One form was via punitorum, the road of punishments. Those accused of ideological treason, like criticizing military campaigns or advocating for peace, were yoked into wagons with wheels but no axles. They could not turn, only dragged. They were commanded to walk these carts from milepost to milepost, watched by rotating guards. The carts had one purpose: exhaustion. Prisoners could pause, but never step off. They slept sitting, ate with difficulty. Their feet blistered, their backs hunched. One such soul, a pacifist senator named Servius Gallus, spent 6 months on the road from Rome to Ravenna. Each town he passed wrote his name in dust beside their waystones. Gallus ambulavit hic. Gallus walked here. The cart was burned when he reached the sea, but travelers still see rusted wheels beneath shrubs in Alexandria. Meanwhile, treason took a more poetic form. A woman named Damaris was accused of vox antiquitha, old voice, her crime, teaching children songs written during the Republican period, before the emperors. Her punishment was not physical. It was silentium circulithe, the silence of the circle. Every morning, children would gather around her in the forum. She was required to sit in the center, while children stood in silence. No one spoke. No one sang. This continued for 30 days. On the 31st, one child hummed, others joined. The circle grew. Damaris was taken away the next day. No one saw her again. But the children kept humming. In the province of Hispania, Baetica, an engineer named Lucan was found guilty of mapping imperial aqueducts without permission. His maps were detailed, elegant, and accurate. Rome did not forgive precision that it did not authorize. Lucan was sentenced to aquanolius, the waterless path. He was ordered to build a symbolic aqueduct, a structure of arches with no channel, no flow. It led from one field to another, touching no water source. He worked in silence, carving stone after stone, fitting arch to arch. Travelers called it Lucan's Echo. Even now, shepherds say that when the wind passes through, it sounds like water running. Rome had a word for traitors of presence, absentium proditors, those who betrayed by leaving. One such man was a former general named Antonius Crispus. He had retired quietly to a villa in the hills, refusing calls to rejoin a new campaign. Rome viewed this as desertion in spirit. His punishment was domus closet, the closed house. His villa was sealed by imperial edict. Friends could not visit. Letters were intercepted. Markets refused his coin. Antonius lived in luxury, but total isolation. After a year, the story goes, he began to carve statues from clay and speak with them. He held debates, shared wine, sang duets. When soldiers finally entered, they found 32 clay figures. One bore the face of the emperor. It had no mouth, and in Ephesus, treason bloomed through ink. A woman named Laelia wrote plays where characters wore togas, but spoke like philosophers. Her words questioned fate and gently mocked divine power. Rome accused her of scriptum umbratile, the shadowed script. Her punishment was theatrum eversum, the inverted theater. She was made to stage her plays with actors facing away from the audience, performing in total silence. The audience watched only backs, gestures, shadows. But soon, crowds grew. They learned to listen differently, to read motion like text. Rome ended the punishment after 3 seasons. But the inverted theater lived on. Its silence louder than any decree. Let this final part drift through you. That treason in Rome was not always treachery. It was often tenderness, a refusal to echo, a desire to remember something gentler. And Rome punished it not with rage, but with precision, with poetry, with silence. Tonight, dear listener, sleep beneath the arches of forgotten maps. Rest on the road. Gallus walked. Hear the theater of backs and the waterless wind. In this next whisper of Roman history, we move from punishment in the public square to a strange, spectral form of retribution carried out in sacred places, temples and shrines of old gods whose names still echo in Latin prayers. When political betrayal was cloaked in religious defiance, the response was not only swift but spiritually cruel. A priestess named Talia, daughter of a senator, once refused to carry out a sacrifice in honor of the emperor's genius. Her defiance, quiet and ritual-bound, was considered a spiritual treason. Rome punished her with sacrum negatum, the denial of the sacred. She was taken to the temple of Juno and made to sleep for 7 nights under the altar, with no fire, no food, and no human contact. The temple's marble remained cold. Its silence became her sentence. They say she emerged, different hair prematurely silvered, her eyes unable to focus on any face. She wandered the forum for years, mumbling blessings to empty air. Such sentences were not designed for pain but for erasure. Elsewhere in the empire, a young augur named Titus Varro was punished for misinterpreting an omen in a way that criticized imperial expansion. He read a flock of birds veering westward and said, "The land grows weary of conquest." He was exiled, yes, but more strangely, he was given a curse, umbra loquens, the talking shadow. Every morning, scribes were assigned to walk behind him and speak aloud everything he did. If he picked a fig, they said, "Titus hungers, though the empire is full." If he stumbled, they intoned, "Titus falls," for his words were heavy. He lived for 20 years in the province of Thrace, with these voices always narrating, never ceasing. Some said the voices drove him mad, others say they became his only friends. But perhaps the most chilling punishment of all came from the cult of Vestida, keepers of Rome's eternal flame. A Vestal virgin named Flavia was accused of secretly aiding a lover who spoke against the emperor. She did not deny it. Her fate was sepulchrum, Vesta, the tomb of Vesta. A small chamber was dug beneath the earth. She was given 1 oil lamp, 1 loaf of bread, and a single jug of water. Then, the chamber was sealed. Above it, a marble plaque read, "Silence burns longer than fire." She did not scream. She sang, they said, until the lamp ran out. And even in places far from Rome, treason found strange echoes. In a Gallic province, an entire village was punished for failing to send tribute. The emperor declared them oblivion damnata condemned to forgetting. Maps were redrawn, road signs changed. Messengers were instructed to pretend the village never existed. No one was allowed to speak its name. And slowly, over seasons, the village faded, not physically, but from memory. A merchant once wrote that he remembered buying figs from that village, but no record of its orchards remained. Even its god statues were removed and melted down. The villagers lived on, but the world forgot them. And that, in Rome's eyes, was justice. Now, let your thoughts drift to the Ponus Omni, the punishment of dreams. This was reserved for philosophers who stirred unrest with their teachings. They were not killed or imprisoned. They were relocated to isolated towers, far from cities, where they were forced to sleep at irregular hours. Each chamber was fitted with shifting light panels. Time lost meaning. Dreams became fractured. Philosophers, starved of rhythm, began to lose the line between waking and sleeping. One named Julianus wrote his last essay in blood, believing he was holding ink. Let your own dreams, dear listener, be free from such torments. Let the marble fade. Let the shadows fall. Sleep now, where names are erased and silence sings. Now we enter a gentler corridor of cruelty where betrayal was answered not with swords, but with sound, or the lack thereof. A punishment not found in blood, but in rhythm, music, and voice. Rome knew that silence could be more lasting than death. In a villa outside Capua, a senator's son named Gaius Aelius was accused of composing lyrics that compared the emperor to rust on bronze toll. But the message was clear. His punishment was quantus, Interrupt us. The broken song .gaius was not silenced outright. Instead, every evening at dusk, a small choir of state singers was sent to his home. They sang his own lyrics back to him, but only the first half of each line. Then they would stop. The silence between the broken phrases became unbearable. He begged to hear the full verses. The singers only bowed and left off after weeks. Gaius stopped writing altogether. His hands refused ink. They say the silence followed him even into his dreams. Further east, in the dusty garrisons near Syria, soldiers sometimes whispered of a punishment called iter. Imagine the journey of images. Treasonous artistos who painted the emperor in shadow or posed figures without divine symbols were sent on a forced pilgrimage. Their task, to walk from shrine to shrine, temple to temple, and repaint imperial murals with exact, approved likenesses. One artist, named Cassia, known for bold style and free lines, was made to trace official portraits in dry pigment on stone. For 2 years straight, her brush became a prisoner. Her colors dulled, and when she returned, it is said she never again painted a face. Only birds in flight, always flying away in the narrow back streets of Trastevere. An orator named Felix was sentenced under the law of vocem relicta, the voice that abandoned. He had fled during a debate when asked to declare loyalty to the emperor. Claiming illness, Rome took this as a refusal of public speech. His punishment was strange. Once a week, Felix was taken to the forum, stood atop the rostra, and wrapped in red cloth. He was not allowed to speak. Instead, an actor read random phrases from lost Roman plays into the air around him. Felix became a statue wrapped in contradiction. Onlookers said he wept without blinking. Elsewhere, in a sleepy town near the Tiber, treason was whispered through geometry. A schoolmaster named Crassus was found teaching children to draw circles around maps of Roman provinces, a metaphor they claimed for encirclement. His punishment was linea mutata, the changed line. Crassus was given chalk and ordered to draw ovals, then destroy them. Draw again, destroy again. For months, his hands trembled from repetition. The floor of his classroom became a pale smear of endless curves. Let your breathing slow now, dear listener, and think of the murmurium, the punishment of murmurs. This was given to spies caught spreading false messages, but whose crimes were not strong enough to merit death. They were followed every hour of every day by low-voiced companions hired by the state. These whisperers said nothing of meaning, only nonsense, half-words, echoes. Salt flows uphill. Stars have memory. The emperor eats time. One such spy, named Afer, began to repeat the murmurs. Then he began to answer them, and finally, he forgot his own name, calling himself Shadow of Echo. This, Rome believed, was rehabilitation. Rest. Now let the silence of half-songs and the curve of fading chalk drawings lull you into a deeper stillness. For even when Rome whispered, its punishments rang through the centuries. Now, dear listener, drift deeper into the folds of time. Let us unfold another scroll of Rome's quiet cruelties. Those punishments reserved, not for enemies of war, but of thought, of speech, of unsanctioned memory. High in the marble-cold libraries of Pergamon, a scholar named Lucius Septimus was punished under the charge of memoria in Solitha, the holding of unusual memory. He had compiled ancient poems that praised the old republic, and had whispered them to students as though they were lullabies. Rome could not abide lullabies that stirred rebellion. Lucius was sentenced to memoria, rubered memory. His books were burned, but the ashes were saved. He was forced to copy, by hand, new imperial histories, using ink mixed with those ashes. At each page, he wrote smelled faintly of smoke. They say, Lucius began to cough ink, that his fingers stained his face, until it looked like he wore a funeral mask. And what of those who betrayed with gestures? A dancer in the theater of Corinth, named Hespera, once choreographed a silent routine in which a figure wrapped in black silk slowly unraveled itself until only a crown remained. The crowd applauded, but Rome watched. That her punishment was just as veritous a forbidden movement. She was made to wear iron rings on her joints, designed to restrict fluid motion. Her performances were reduced to stiff poses. Her audience vanished. Yet, in the gardens of the city, children would sometimes mimic her original dance in the dusk, whispering, "The silk is truth," in the mines of Dalmatia. A punishment called fumus veritatis, the smoke of truth, was given to those who wrote anonymous satire against Roman officials. One man, known only as the lampmaker, had placed small clay lamps near statues, each engraved with biting phrases like, "This stone thinks more than the senator beside it." When caught, he was sentenced not to death, but to labor in sulfur pits, where yellow vapors clouded the air. Each day, he crafted real lamps and marked, unspeaking, but rumor claims that every 10th lamp he made flickered in strange rhythms when lit, as if still whispering satire to the shadows. Let us now wander to a quiet punishment. A woman named Valeria, in the hills of Gaul, was accused of somnia contra principum, dreams against the emperor. Not actions, not words, only dreams. A neighbor reported that she had spoken of a vision in which the emperor's statue cracked and wept blood. Rome, ever vigilant, sentenced her to vigilatio, eternal wakefulness. She was given herbs that disrupted sleep. Her room was lit at all hours. Every time her eyes closed, a bell chimed softly. After weeks, she began to speak only in fragments. Phrases like, "The marble is afraid," and "The lion sleeps with eyes open." Some say she found sleep at last, one summer morning, beneath the roots of an olive tree. Wrapped in petals. Now, breathe deeper, listener, and remember the punishment of scriptor, occultist, the hidden writer. This fate met those who sent letters in invisible ink, or composed banned philosophies using code. One such philosopher, Marcus Lento, had devised an alphabet from knots in thread. He sent messages sewn into cloaks, saying things like "freedom begins at the hem." When discovered, Rome did not imprison him. They wrapped his hands in wool, bound them gently, but tightly. Each day, servants read him books he could not write down. Eventually, Marcus asked them to stop reading, not because he disagreed, but because the thoughts had nowhere to go. His mind, they say, filled like a sealed amphora. In the stillness, he began to hum, low, steady, patient. Rome had punished his writing, not his breath, and now, in this breathless quiet, let your own thoughts soften, drift among the forgotten dancers, the ink-stained hands, the bells that guarded dreams. For the greatest punishment Rome devised was not pain, but the echo that followed those who thought differently. Sleep well in that echo. Let your breath slow now, as we step into the quieter punishments of Rome, those etched not in stone, but in wind, in rhythm, in the forgetting of names. This is where betrayal found no blood, no prison but exile in the mind. One such punishment was known as omissio nominis, the loss of one's name. A scribe named Junius, accused of crafting double-meaning poems about the emperor's appetite, was condemned not to death, but to anonymity. His name was stricken from records. He was given a number sexviand, made to live among others sentenced the same. They wore no tags, spoke only in numbers, could not refer to their pasts. Some forgot their own parents. Others made up new lives. But Junius, it is said, whispered his name to sleeping sparrows, hoping one might carry it away. Far north, near the Germanic frontier, treason came in the form of weather. A general named Otho failed to report a failed campaign, and instead blamed frost. Rome did not forgive excuses. His sentence was Coelum Punctorum, the sky of points. He was given a tower open to all winds. No roof, no walls, only needles of cold. Each night, he slept under the stars, wrapped in damp wool. Soldiers below joked that he now served the legions of mist. He died not of wounds, but of silence. Elsewhere, a merchant who had undercounted tax tribute to the empire was punished by the ritual of pondera, inverse inverted weights. Every morning, he was required to carry weights through the market baskets full of feathers made to appear as gold, and gold painted to look like refuse. People laughed. Children mocked. But the merchant, Gaius Tertius, kept walking. His punishment was to never again trust what he carried. One day, he vanished. Only the feathers remained. And in the marble baths of Carthage, a midwife named Livia was found guilty of harboring fugitives who had spoken against the emperor. Rome declared her physically, but ritually. She was sentenced to aqua mutat, the changed water dot. From then on, she could not touch public fountains. No bathhouse would accept her. Water turned away. Rain was her only friend. She lived in alleys, catching drops in jars. Mothers whispered that her fingers left dew on stone, and for those who betrayed was silence. Rome had votum fractum, the broken vow. Priests who hesitated, who paused too long during sacred rites, were made to repeat their prayers in isolation, over and over, in perfect form. One priest, Sabinus, spent 10 years alone in a shrine, his only company, echoes. They say he forgot where his voice ended and the stones began. His final prayer was not to the gods, but to the silence. Let your breath settle into that silence now, and remember the punishment of pulvis, veritatis, the dust of truth. A librarian caught hiding banned scrolls was not imprisoned. Instead, every morning, he was given a scroll to erase. He had to grind the ink away, bit by bit, until the parchment was blank. Each day, he erased one truth, and slowly, it is said, he began to forget the sound of words. The punishment was complete when he asked a passing guard, "What is ink?" These, dear listener, were punishments made, not with blades, but with forgetting. Rome did not need to break bones. It only had to bend memory. Sleep now. Let your own memories stretch gently through time, untouched, unjudged. For in this quiet moment, no empire watches. Now let us drift farther still, to the punishment of Lux, deserted, abandoned light. For those who betrayed Rome through enlightenment, who shared knowledge not meant for public eyes. This was the most poetic curse of all. One mathematician named Lartius shared his understanding of eclipse cycles with sailors who then predicted a lunar darkening on the same day as an imperial feast. The public saw it as an omen. Rome saw it as rebellion. Lartius was taken to the Temple of Sol, Invictus there. They sealed every window, extinguished every lamp, and kept him for a month, in lightless silence. When he emerged, he could no longer look at the sun. He became a walker of shadows, a man for whom light was a betrayal. Elsewhere in Alexandria, a woman named Dama taught geometry to girls not forbidden by law, but frowned upon by order. A magistrate declared her guilty of sapientia, wisdom, thought her punishment. She was allowed to speak only in questions. For a year, she had to answer every inquiry with another inquiry. "What is your name?" they would ask. "Is a name not a vessel?" She would reply. Eventually, her voice became a series of echosoft, wandering, never landing. Some say she became a priestess of Delphi. Others say her questions still drift on desert winds. Not and what of, via mutata, altered road. This was the fate of cartographers who drew maps omitting imperial landmarks or shifting borders subtly. One such artist, Rufinus, was punished by being placed on a cart with no reins, pulled by a blind ox. Each day, the ox wandered a different road. Rufinus was told, "Wherever you end up, draw a map." He did, but the maps never matched. Soon, he forgot what was real. One scroll showed mountains where seas should be. Another placed Rome beneath the moon. For Rome, that confusion was perfect justice. Let us not forget Ventus Resuth, Wind of Laughter, a playwright who mocked the Senate through a character known as Senex Spumus. The smoky old man was sentenced not to prison, but to performance. For 10 nights, he had to recite his own play before senators while wearing a mask of smoke-colored glass. No one laughed. Not once. The silence became so dense that he began to laugh alone, louder each night. On the 10th evening, he tore off the mask and cried, "Even tragedy needs audience." They carried him out, still laughing. And now we return to dreams. Rome feared dreams as much as daggers, and so Somnium Vindicta, the vengeance of dreams, was created. For those who dared speak of prophetic visions against the emperor, they were not punished with death, but with dreams. They were made to sleep in temples filled with whispering wind instruments. Every night, priests played notes meant to shape dreams into fear. One dreamer, Flaccus, awoke nightly screaming, "The laurel weeps." After 100 such nights, he begged never to dream again. His final sleep came in silence. Now let your own sleep approach. No shadows follow you here. No ink to erase. No name to forget. Just the soft turning of forgotten scrolls. The hush of temples now empty. The cruel punishments of Rome were endless. Yes, but tonight, only their echoes remain. Sleep, dear listener, where the empire cannot reach. Breathe softly now. For tonight we drift into the strangest form of punishment, not of the body, nor even the mind, but of reality itself. Rome, in its unmatched ingenuity, understood something few dared name aloud. The mind believes what it sees, but the heart trembles at what cannot be named. And so we begin with Domus Impressa, the inverted house. This fate was reserved for architects, engineers, or advisors who altered imperial blueprints, who failed to reinforce foundations of public works, or worse, who altered a plan to make themselves remembered. One such soul, Marcus Corvinus, changed the inscription on a colonnade to include his own name above that of the emperor. His punishment was to live in a house where everything had been reversed. Floors were painted like ceilings. Staircases lead downward only. Doors opened into walls, and furniture was hung from the rafters. Food was served on plates beneath tables. He was forbidden to correct any guest. Every visitor left confused, and eventually, none returned. Corvinus, they say, grew so disoriented that he crawled on the ceiling in his final days, whispering, "Up is only a lie told by walls." But stranger still was Vox retorted, the twisted voice. A senator named Attianus had written secret speeches denouncing the emperor's taxes. These were found hidden in wax tablets beneath his villa. His punishment was not to be silenced. Instead, Rome had orators recite his words each night backwards. His speeches were chanted in reverse before a public audience. Attianus was made to sit on a marble bench in the center and listen. At first, it seemed absurd. Then it became maddening. Some say his dreams began playing backwards. He woke up before he fell asleep. He greeted people before meeting them. By the end of the month, his own words confused him. He reportedly asked, "Have I already died, or must I now begin?" Then came Lignum solitarius, the solitary tree. This was used for those accused of aiding enemy scouts, mapmakers who misplaced border stones, or travelers who shared water with wandering spies. Their punishment was to be taken to an empty field, where one tree stood, sycamore, olive, or fig. There they were left, with only the tree, no chains, no walls. But they could not leave the shadow of the tree. If they stepped beyond the longest reach of its shade, they were hunted down. Some dug into the roots. Others sat and watched leaves fall. But in time, they stopped moving. They became still as bark. One man, Publius of Baetica, was said to have whispered his crimes to the ants, so the leaves would not know. There were those who betrayed through the stars. Rome had its astrologers, and not all were trusted. If one predicted the fall of a ruler, or the rise of a comet that aligned with a conspirator's birthday, they were tried under Caeli Mendaces, the lie of heaven. The punishment: they were taken to observatories with sealed domes, stars on every surface, all wrong. North was south, Scorpio beside Leo. The moon reversed. They were told to chart their predictions. None made it past the first week. One astrologer, Celestinus, tore his star maps to pieces and cried, "There is no sky. There is only Rome." Another, a young woman named Varilla, left only one note, scratched into a bronze plate. "When the heavens lie, truth is buried below. Sleep comes easier now, does it not? And still we drift." A composer once wrote a hymn that used the emperor's name as a hidden rhythm. The Senate found it too clever, too close to mockery. He was sentenced to echo vacuitha, empty echo, placed in a marble room with perfect acoustics. He was given instruments with no strings, flutes with no holes, drums made of marble. Each day, he had to compose a melody on silence. They say his heart beat the rhythm, but when asked what he had created, he whispered, the sound of being unheard. Let that sound carry you now, past time and judgment. Now, the hush deepens. We step past the veil, into punishments that lived not in law nor stone, but in superstition, crafted by rumor, sustained by fear. Rome understood that, to conquer the soul, one must haunt the shadow. So we begin with Umbra, Fidelis the loyal shadow. When a guard named Marius was found writing letters to a rebel general, he claimed they were The scrolls never left his room, but suspicion was enough. Rather than execution, Rome gave him a torch and stationed him in the mausoleum of Augustus. His task, to walk the halls every night, casting light on the walls. But he was followed, assigned a man to follow him, exactly mirroring his every step, holding no torch, making no sound. If Marius turned, so did the man. If he stopped, the man stood still behind him. He was never spoken to. He was told, that is your loyalty. Marius, may it never leave your side. By the 4th week, Marius begged for death. Rome granted it silently. Another tale comes from the harbor. Fames dubieth a doubtful hunger. A baker named Titus fed bread to a crowd before an imperial edict made grain rationing strict. Though his act saved many, the state saw it as undermining policy. His punishment was never hunger, but the fear of feeding. Rome ordered him to prepare bread every day, yet he was told each loaf might be poisoned. He had to bake, to serve, and to eat. For a year, he lived in dread, uncertain if each bite would end him. They say he began cutting loaves into hundreds of pieces, hoping the dose would disperse. He survived, but he never ate again. And now, let us whisper of Sanguis Tacitus, the quiet blood. There was a man named Varenus, a notary in a northern province, who had forged the seal of a senator, not for gain but to free a detritan widow. Rome could not forgive the act, but neither did it stain its hands with open punishment. Instead, they sent him a scroll every month. Inside was a red dot, nothing else. The first time, he wept. The second time, he hid it. By the 6th, he began marking himself with red ink, not knowing why. On the 12th, he vanished. The locals said, he became the message. And finally, we come to Lacrima Regis, the king's tear. A sculptor named Julia created a statue of the emperor not from stone, but from melted candle wax. When the Senate saw it, they were horrified. Wax melts, wax weeps. They saw it as an omen. Julia was not imprisoned. Instead, they took her to the Senate floor, placed her beside the wax figure, and lit a single flame at its base. She was told to stand as long as the statue stood. Hour by hour, it softened. Hour by hour, she wept. As the final drop slid down the emperor's cheek, she fainted from heat and fear. The senators called it performance justice. Julia never sculpted again, but in a hidden cave outside Rome, someone later found a wax heart, intact, sealed in stone. Let your breath steady now. Rome's justice was not just law. It was art. It was theater. It was fear disguised as form. Let the shadows fall gently now, for in this next chapter, we sink into a softer, stranger form of torment. These punishments were neither steel nor flame. They were ideas, crafted not for flesh, but for memory. Rome had learned by now, the sharpest wounds are carved into the mind, and the deepest echoes are not made by screams, but by silence. We begin with Somnium Publicata, public dream, in the reign of Emperor Aurelian. A scribe named Petronius fell under suspicion, not for any spoken word or written treason, but for what he dreamed. It began when he recited a dream. To his wife he had seen the emperor, barefoot, walking among a crowd that ignored him. A dream, no more. But the wife told a friend. The friend told a merchant. The merchant told a soldier. Within 2 days, Petronius was arrested. His punishment: he was not beaten. He was not banished. Instead, he was placed in a dormitory beneath the Senate floor, a room filled with 50 cots, all occupied by others accused of dreaming wrongly. Each night, a physician walked the rows and recorded their murmurs, their twitches, their sleep sounds. Petronius slept among them for 9 years. No one spoke aloud during the day. They were allowed to read, but only empty scrolls. They were served food, but always the same dish, soft grain mash and water. Night after night, they slept in regulated shifts, monitored like stars charted on a sky that no longer turned. It is said that in his final year, Petronius stopped dreaming entirely. He left the dormitory with a single word etched on his wrist. Vigil, meaning awake. No record remains of what he said when released, only that he never slept again. And now, we drift to penumbraless Lex, the law of half-light. There once was a noblewoman named Sabina who was suspected of aiding a runaway political prisoner. The evidence was unclear, the charges unspoken, so Rome chose uncertainty as her sentence. Sabina was confined not in a cell, but in a villa modified with great care. The windows were made of obsidian, glass-thick black, and impenetrable to light. Candles were permitted, but had to be red. Mirrors were banned. Her chamber was lit with a single lantern placed behind a tinted screen. She lived like this for 7 years. Food was always served on slate. Clothes were dyed gray. No color was allowed. Her guards wore soft slippers, so their footsteps made no sound. She was told, "This is not punishment. This is patience." Eventually, she requested to face trial, even execution. Her petition was returned blank. She died without ever learning what she had been accused of, but her villa remains sealed. Locals say at dusk, a red glow still pulses behind the walls, and shadows walk where no body moves. Now, let us drift further into the quiet Tintu, scriptum nulla, the writings of none. During the reign of Hadrian, an anonymous set of letters began to circulate through Rome. They contained no accusations, new conspiracies, only strange poetry. Lines like, "The wolf wears laurels, but the land draws maps. Rome eats from golden bowls, but dines on its own hands." Senators grew uneasy. The emperor ordered a search for the author. Weeks passed, then months. No one confessed. No one was caught. So Rome punished everyone. All scribes in the city, every clerk, copyist, letter carver, were ordered to burn their ink supplies and were given instead chalk and slate. For a full season, no permanent writing was allowed in Rome. Not a decree, not a contract, not even a receipt. The markets collapsed, court trials stalled, and yet the poetry continued to appear, etched into walls, painted onto rooftops, sewn into garments. The punishment lasted 91 days. When ink was restored, the first word written officially by the state was memory. And still, the poetry returned. Some say it still does. Now let us speak of iter, confusing, the confusing path. Lucilius, a provincial tax collector, had allowed a known rebel to escape through a mountain pass. He claimed it was an accident, that he had misread the route, that he had been given false instructions. Rome decided to test his sense of direction. They built a maze in the center of Capua. Not a twisting, hedge-lined puzzle, but a full-scale, living street map, with walls, taverns, fountains, and alleyways. Dozens of actors played citizens. Lucilius was placed at its center and told to find his way out. Each day, the layout changed slightly. Each evening, a bell would ring, and he would begin again from the center. There were no clues, no signs. He wandered for 400 days. He was eventually released, but with one condition: every 5 years. On the date of his original failure, he had to return and walk the maze again until his death. They say that even in old age, he walked steadily, and that each time he reached the outer wall, he would whisper, "There are no exits in Rome, only turns." Now let us hush and breathe in the tale of Aqua Silens, the silent water. A shipwright in Ossia named Dacian was found guilty of conspiring to sink a grain vessel as revenge for unpaid debts. But the ship did not sink. The damage was found and repaired in time. Rome, ever inventive, did not punish the attempt with drowning. Instead, Dacian was made steward of the city's aqueducts. But the twist was this: each day, he had to measure the water by sound alone. No buckets, no markers, only the echo of trickling from stone to pool. If the sound changed, he he was fined. If the echo was delayed, he was whipped. Dacian became a student of silence. He could tell rainfall by the splash of a drop. He knew when a leaf had fallen into the current. He lasted 14 years, and when he died, they found that he had carved wave patterns into the walls of his chambers, like lullabies for flowing sleep. Let us pause now and inhale softly for one final punishment. Tonight, one Rome never spoke of aloud. Oblivium, imperialista, imperial forgetting. This was not recorded in law. It was not discussed in Senate. It was whispered in the tombs beneath Palatine Hill. It was said that those who knew too much, who saw what the empire wanted, buried, were not executed. They were erased from within. Rome had herbalists, scientists, alchemists. A drink was created clear, tasteless, slow. It did not kill. It thinned the thread between memory and mind. The punished would wake each morning remembering less. Not just facts, but names. Faces their own. One man, a former advisor named Lentulus, was fed the draft for months. He forgot his wife, his city, the emperor, then his language. In the final days, he sat smiling at sunlight, clapping softly for no one. When asked who he was, he answered, Rome. Then silence. Let this silence soothe you now. Rome's punishments were not always violent. Sometimes they were patient. They chipped at the soul, with whispers and dreams, with mazes and echoes, with chalk and firiglight. And when they were done, nothing was left to rebel. Now we enter the final corridor before silence. Rome, at its height, began punishing even what had not yet occurred: thoughts, premonitions, fear still forming. These were the crimes of anticipation. The Senate called this cognito, guilty thought. A philosopher named Antyllus once said, "The tyrant fears the thought not yet spoken." His words echoed too far. He was summoned to a chamber lined with blank scrolls. Each morning, he had to write what he might have thought, had he dared, and each night, the scrolls were burned unread. He wrote for 102 days. On the last scroll, he penned, "I no longer know which thoughts are mine." Next came Manus, prevented hand, used against scribes believed to be plotting subversive literature. They were not shackled, but given ink that disappeared as it dried. For every sentence they tried to write, the page returned blank. One woman, Laelia, kept trying for months. She wrote poetry to her lost son. None remains. Rome called it mercy. But in a cave in Illyricum, a wall bears a faint impression. Her poem, pressed with invisible ink, revealed only under moonlight. Now, let us hush beneath Umbri Centura, the censored shadows. Actors who performed satire without permission were tried, without words. They were made to act with masks that had no eyes, no mouth, only smooth, blank faces. Each night they took the stage, no speech, no expression, just motion. Audiences wept. One actor bowed every evening, touching the ground. When asked why, he said, "To the silence that plays louder than any drum." Lastly, vocem perdito, lost voice. This was not inflicted. It was caught. In the hills near Etruria. Those who betrayed Rome were sometimes spared all punishment, except one. They were exiled where the wind stole sound. In that valley, voices vanished. You could scream and hear nothing. They called it the Field of Echoes. One boy born there grew up mute, though his tongue worked fine. Only when he left did he speak, and the first word he said was forgiven. As we end tonight's walk, let silence be the final sentence. The cruelest Roman punishments were never loud. They were still, they were forgotten, and now, so may you rest now. We approach the final curtain. Rome, in its infinite reach, understood that the most potent punishments are not borne by the body but by the soul. These were the fates that lingered beyond life, extending their shadow across generations and history itself. We begin with Nomen Erasist, the erased name. This was the ultimate sentence, reserved for those whose actions threatened the foundation of the empire. Senators who plotted insurrection, generals who betrayed their legions, or philosophers who dared question the divinity of Rome. were subjected to this silent annihilation. It was not enough to execute them. Rome sought to remove every trace of their existence. Their names were chiseled from monuments, their portraits destroyed, their scrolls burned. Even their family members were forced to change their surnames, erasing any connection to the condemned. One such victim was Quintus Varius, a once beloved general accused of treason. His victories were celebrated in mosaics and statues across the empire. But after his trial, every mention of his name was obliterated. To this day, fragments of stone inscriptions bear the faint outlines of his erased letters, ghostly reminders of his once great legacy. And yet, the memory of him lingers in whispers, carried by those who knew his deeds but dared not speak his name aloud. Next, we drift into Via Perpetuus, the endless road. This punishment was given to messengers who failed their duty, losing vital dispatches or delivering false information to the emperor. These individuals were condemned to walk the empire's roads indefinitely. They were given no destination, no map, only a single instruction: deliver the truth. Their feet wore grooves into the stones of the Via Appia. They were given neither rest nor reprieve, constantly shadowed by silent guards who ensured their journey never ended. Some walked for decades, their faces becoming weathered masks of despair. One messenger, known only as Flavius, reportedly walked from Rome to the edges of Gaul and back 13 times before collapsing on the steps of the Senate. His final words were, "I have delivered nothing, and yet I have carried everything." Let us now whisper of Clavum Silenti, the silent nail, for those who betrayed their guild's blacksmiths, weavers, carpenters. Rome devised a punishment that turned their tools into torment. They were presented with the instruments of their craft, but forbidden to use them. A blacksmith who conspired to forge counterfeit coins was given an anvil and hammer, but no iron. Each day, he was made to strike the hammer against the empty anvil, creating a hollow clang that echoed through the city square. This sound became his only legacy. Children would imitate the rhythm, calling it the nail that builds nothing. Finally, we reach Sor's ultimate, the final fate. This was not a punishment handed down by the Senate or the emperor, but by Rome itself. Those who evaded justice through exile or bribery often found themselves haunted by this invisible hand of retribution. The Sor's ultima was a curse, whispered by priests who claimed to channel the will of the gods. It was said to strip the condemned of their luck, ensuring that every venture failed, every ally betrayed them, and every path led to ruin. One merchant, Lucius Cassius, fled Rome after embezzling funds from a temple treasury. Though he had great wealth abroad, every ship he owned eventually sank, every house he built collapsed, and every child he sired died before reaching adulthood. He returned to Rome, a pauper, begging for forgiveness at the steps of the temple he had wronged. The priests, unmoved, whispered the final words of his curse: "You have paid nothing, yet you owe everything." Now, as the echoes of these punishments fade, let us close our journey with a breath of stillness. Rome's power was unmatched, its justice unrelenting. But even the greatest empire could not escape time's erosion. The stones of its roads have crumbled, its laws forgotten, its punishments buried beneath the sands. Yet, in the quiet of the night, when the world is hushed, we can still hear the faint whispers of those who suffered beneath Rome's shadow. Their voices remind us of the fragility of power, the weight of justice, and the eternal struggle between mercy and cruelty. Let their stories guide you now into sleep, where no shadows follow and no judgment awaits.